Hey everyone, Nathan Wells here and welcome to the One Brick Studios Workshop. Today I'm going to show you how I made this new toothbrush holder out of some nice fancy hardwood. This shelf was super cluttered. It still kind of gets cluttered. I've cleaned it off for the cameras. Normally I'm going to have, all this stuff up here. But I also kept a lot of my smaller bathroom implements or tools or whatever you want to call them, like scissors, razor, toothbrush, this little rubber tip thing that you put between your teeth to help clean out crap. They all went in a mason jar, like you can see how Danielle does it down here. I wanted to make it a little nicer, and I had not really done any woodworking projects that used nice looking fancy hardwood. I was mostly using dimensional lumber designed for construction projects, and so this was my first foray into something a little nicer looking. Let's go to the workshop and I'll talk more about what I did to make this thing. Is it a cup? I guess it's a cup, but sure. Let's go to the workshop. All right, back in the workshop. So this was a very quick project I did over a weekend. It is 4 different types of wood. There is maple, cherry, black walnut, and padauk. This fancy wood is all the way from Africa, and it has a very red, very rich color. Here is some of it that has not been sealed or stained when it is first cut. Unfortunately, generally, as it ages and is exposed to sunlight, it gets more and more brown, but I have tried to mitigate that by sealing it with a certain sealant. I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. But for now, yeah, here is the cup. It is about 2.5 inches square, about 4 inches tall, has little rubber feet on it, and it has a hole in the bottom with a drain to allow airflow and also water to wick away. When I first envisioned this project, it was important to me that the layers of the wood really contrasted each other. I also didn't want to stain the wood. I wanted to stick as close to the actual wood colors as possible. I cut down the 4 woods into rough 3-inch by 3-inch squares, knowing that I'd trim them down to about 2.5 inches square in the end. In hindsight, I should have been more precise with the initial cuts. I would have saved a lot more time on trimming and sanding if I'd squared my cuts better. I spent a few minutes arranging the squares until I found a pattern I liked. The maple, walnut, and padauk boards were originally all the same thickness, so I decided to trim them further down so the final layers of wood were each a little different. I originally wanted to inlay metal bands into the cup, so I cut grooves into the top square. In the end, I made a few errors which prevented me from inlaying the metal, so I focused on just making a nice wooden cup instead. With the wood clamped up, I attempted to square up the sides of the cup to be roughly flush. Unfortunately, a belt sander isn't really designed for this. I should be using a planer and a jointer, but I don't have those, so I had to make do. I found the center of each of the squares and drilled a pilot hole. Because I hadn't worked with hardwood before, and since I was trying to preserve as much hardwood cut off as possible, I opted to cut a hole with a hole saw instead of a Forstner bit. The hole saw would leave me with a cutout cylinder of wood, whereas the Forstner bit would just give me chips. This turned out to be a bad justification. A hole saw is primarily designed to cut holes in flat material like drywall or plywood, not thick blocks of hardwood. The hole saw cut a reasonable hole, but the walls of the hole were rough on the inside. Plus, the salvaged cylinder of wood is essentially unusable and not really worth the effort. After cutting rough holes in the cherry, maple, and walnut, I switched to a Forstner bit for the padauk and was much happier with the result. For the padauk, I used 2 different Forstner bits, a 1.5-inch bit to cut all the way through for the drain hole, and a 2-inch bit to cut almost all the way through, stopping just enough to leave a lip for the metal drain hardware to fit over. With the holes cut, I paired up 2 sections and glued them together with wood glue before gluing the 2 glued sections together. I roughly sanded down the misaligned edges on the belt sander until the sides were square again. This is where I unevenly sanded down the grooves I'd cut for the inlaid metal. I couldn't fix the grooves to fit the metal I had prepared, so I just widened the grooves with my router bit until the grooves were aligned. I'll use the metal strips for a future project. I finished off with sanding the sides with my orbital sander, starting with 120 and then finishing with 220 grit. The holes in the blocks didn't quite align, so I had to use a rasp and a file to clean up the roughest spots. It's still not nearly as smooth as the outside of the block, but it will work for my needs. So now that it was all sanded, it's time for sealing. And because of padauk and its unique properties of being a very bright red wood, I wanted to seal it properly because if it's exposed to sunlight, after a period of time, it will turn to more of a brownish, dark color, which is fine. I mean, it is wood, but I wanted to retain as much of the reddish orange color as possible. So I did some research online, and holy crap, is there a ton of options for sealing wood. First, I have to do shellac, then I have to do polyurethane, and then I have to put on this conditioner. The shellac has to go on at least 6 coats, and that's already been done. This has got its shellacking, but the polyurethane needs a few coats, and what's interesting about this stuff is it requires a whole month for it to properly degas. It dries in about 24 hours, but it cures over a month, and you don't want to put anything else on top of the polyurethane while it's degassing. So with all that done, obviously I was not going to wait a month to make this video. It's going to look essentially the same even with the polyurethane and the conditioner on it. So now you get to see, I already put the feet on, mostly because I wanted to see how it looked. And I put the drainage in, which is a shower drain, which you can get for like $1 at your local hardware store. So, final thoughts. I wanted to work solely with hardwood. I did some research online, found some cherry, maple, walnut, and padauk. I really like the walnut. I want to work more with it. It is kind of, really appeals to me. Kind of the grayish brown color is very cool. Also, the differences in cherry and maple are maybe not as much as I would have liked. I was hoping that the top here would be a very bright white, and it didn't quite turn out as pale white as I would have liked. So that's the first lesson. Hardwood is obviously different than softwood. If you take too long cutting it, it will burn, and that's bad. I was able to deal with it, sand it away. Softwood, if you kind of just cut slowly, it's not going to care. Hardwood, it doesn't like the friction. It will just start smoking, and the blade will burn marks into it. Not great. Second, when making something like this, I thought I could make it in pieces and then assemble it. So I thought I could drill the center hole into all 4 pieces separately using my drill press, and then just kind of plop them on top of each other, and we're good to go. It doesn't work that way. No matter how carefully you line things up or try to line things up, things are going to misalign. I had to spend a lot of time using a rasp and a file and sandpaper getting the center hole aligned after I had drilled everything. Now, if I was going to do this again, and I almost certainly will because I've gotten some really positive comments from my family saying, "Oh, why do you make me one of these?" Which is great. I would glue them all together, laminate them, and then hit them on the drill press. Now the problem with that is the drill press that I have only goes a certain depth, so that's going to be a challenge that I'm going to have to figure out. Third thing that I learned, keeping an item like this square is very difficult if you don't have a jointer or a planer. I don't have either of those right now. So when I was trying to get these faces to be flat, I was pretty much limited to a belt sander or an orbital sander, but that was more like for fine finishing. So I was using the belt sander, and no matter how carefully you're placing this item on the belt sander, trying to square it up, you're going to press more on one side versus the other side, and you're going to unevenly sand things. That's why I had to abandon the metal inlay and fix my groove, because I was sanding too hard on this side and sanded away my groove. As an aside, that's another thing I would do separately. I would add the metal inlay last after I had cut and drilled everything else instead of trying to do it first. Besides that, I am super happy with this. It looks really nice. Obviously, things I will do differently in the future, and I'm sure the next try I make will be even better, I hope. But it's really satisfying to have something that looks like a finished piece. This is something I put together in about, most of the work was done in 3 days, and then of course the sealing will take another month and a half to do. But this was something really satisfying to do and to display and to show off. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.